So, there was an incident that took place with a group of students at our neighborhood high school over the hill a number of years ago. It's the kind of thing that has really stuck with me. This is long before I ever had high schoolers, so looking from the outside in. Let me share with you the story as best I remember and understand it from reading about it in the local paper and hearing about it talked about around town. There was a team of top students from the school, and they had won a statewide academic competition. They had secured the right to go and compete at the national level. It was a source of great pride and quite a bit of prestige for the school and for students. Plans were being made for the trip, and the excitement was building as the team continued to practice and to prepare for this national competition. Now, this team had worked hard together, and they had a deep, strong bond. So, while one of the members of the team was away on vacation, you know how teams sometimes work, they thought, we'll play a prank on him. Now, this group of kids were used to hanging out together at the boys' house, and the boy's mother trusted them. I mean, come on, these were good kids, right? She had trusted them enough to give them a key to the house to kind of look after it while they were gone. But over the holiday, the team used this key to go in and litter the house with condoms and shaving cream. Not the smartest thing, right? But in their heads, it was hilarious. Only it left a mess. And, you know, when the mother and son returned, probably almost a week later, it had caused a lot of damage. So what had at first seemed funny to the teens was, in fact, a terrible act of vandalism. But even more importantly, it was hurtful to the boy, and it breached that trust, the trust between the mother and son and the rest of the team. So those miscreants, they did take responsibility for their actions eventually, and they came around to understanding what they had done and were expressive of what you can only imagine was deep remorse. I mean, oh no, I think they worked it out. They had messed up big time. The consequences for their action were that they had to make restitution. Now, restitution in this case involved repairing the damage that they had done to the house, but it also involved working on repairing the damage that they had done to their relationship with the mother and with their own teammate. See, somehow they needed to find a way to work together again. And they had to figure this out before they were going to compete as a team in this high-stakes national competition. But you know, with these kids, they were willing to put in the work. I mean, that's how they had gotten there in the first place. Only this wasn't just academic work, but this would take hard, emotional work. And as the story became public, there was another consequence to what they had done, because these golden kids that, you know, the whole community had celebrate, they weren't so golden anymore. And they now had to experience embarrassment for this thing that they had done, and that was hard medicine for them too. The thing is, once it got in the community, all that restitution, that was not enough for some people. there started a flurry of letters to the editor in the local paper from people who were calling for, you can guess it, punishment, right? They needed to be punished. They were livid that the school was still going to allow the team to travel and compete in the national competition. Because in their view, the school was rewarding the team for its bad behavior. Well, you can imagine the public debate continued back and forth in the local paper for weeks. You're laughing. I'm sure you've heard about stuff like this in other places, right? I mean, this is not unique to our neighborhood. And the argument is not unique either. The natural consequences, were they sufficient? What do you think? What's your gut say? The embarrassment, the loss of trust, the fall from golden child status, and that process of restitution, the hard work of putting together those broken relationships? Was that the way to right the wrong? Or should the team have been explicitly punished by not going to the national competition? What does your heart say in this question? It's clear from today's gospel reading that the community that we live in is not the only one that would just up and cry, it's not fair. They should be punished. Because that debate between punishment or restitution to address wrong and restore relationships, it's something that has been part of human communities always. And Jesus is challenging this tendency in today's parable. It's a complex parable. There is so much going on in there. But I think one of the things that he's doing is he's suggesting that a less punitive and more gracious approach is the better way. And not only that, but it's the way of God's kingdom. We may not think it's fair, but it has a sense of fairness to it that defies human logic, but fits with God's topsy-turvy, last will be first logic. So we got all these laborers, right? They've been called to the work of the kingdom, and some came right at the start, but others not until the last minute. Yet, guess what? They all got the same pay. How would you feel if you were that worker who had, let's face it, been busting your britches in the hot sun all day? That parable is not merely a hypothetical story, because Jesus is speaking in response to a question asked by Peter. In the context of Matthew's gospel, it is getting to be late in the game, and this is the last preaching tour before Jesus makes his final trip to Jerusalem. And for a couple of verses now, we have been hearing Jesus tell his disciples, this is not going to be easy, what's coming. Those disciples, they had given up a lot, in many cases everything, to follow Jesus, to hear that call to repent and to turn to God. They had heard that and followed from the beginning, and they want to know. They want to know where they stand in relationship to those Johnny-come-latelys who jump on the salvation bandwagon at the last minute. I mean, you can feel that way too. Think about if you had left your home and your family and your livelihood to follow an itinerant preacher and live a day-to-day existence. That approach that Jesus is suggesting, the gracious forgiveness coupled with the restorative justice, it can and does inspire anger, because it challenges the ways of the world and our own internal sense of how to right wrongs. God's way is not the way of punishment. So what is God up to? Well, I think that restoration and wholeness for everyone involved. Jesus is thinking beyond just, quote, perpetrators. He's thinking of everyone here. And that wholeness is what Jesus is suggesting this way is about. I think that's because when you look at the parable of the landowner, his focus is mostly on reforming the state of mind, not of the latecomers, but of the workers that came first and are arguing for penalizing the latecomers. It's as if he knows that his generosity has already worked a change of heart in those who received the full pay without working a full day. I mean, they came, they were given the full pay, and they experienced that generosity. But the landowner treatment of the ones that came first, they're the ones that are like pretty upset. And it makes me wonder if the landowner's gracious approach is aimed at them. It's almost like he's trying to teach them something. Like it's some form of discipline that's a bit more effective than punishing might have been for anyone involved here. Now, this reminds me of when our kids were in preschool, which would be around at about the time that I heard about these kids at the high school, by the way. So this is a similar place in my head. But I definitely remember sitting in parent co-op preschool orientation every year for, I don't know, like 8 years, something like that. We were in preschool forever. Did anyone else send their kids to parent co-op preschool? Matthew did. Jay did. A couple of you. Okay, so you know what it's like. The thing about parent co-op preschool, it's like the hippie school of preschools, right? It comes out of the 50s, it's play-based, and the parents have a job that's not just like, oh, I'm showing up as a volunteer. Like, they are considered teachers and part of the team in the classroom. And so we have to be trained so that everybody's on the same page about how we're going to interact with these kids. And I have to say, what better place to wrestle with the relational consequences of behavior and fairness and how to forge reconciliation in a way that's more loving than hurtful than in a room full of 4 and 5-year-olds, let me tell you.
Oh my.
So every year we had to be reminded that the director of the preschool would say, discipline means teaching, not punishment. Discipline means teaching, not punishment. It's about modeling. It's about teaching the children how to relate to each other, how to relate to adults, and how to have self-control, anger management, and kindness. Kindness. Every time I would hear that, a light would go on in my head because, if discipline means teaching, not punishment, it's about modeling right relationship. And isn't that what God in Jesus is up to with all of us? So the situation in the parable was a teachable moment where the landowner demonstrated not retribution, not you're owed this and you deserve that, but generosity. The full day laborers were being invited to set aside their resentment and their, that fierce competition of needing to be better than each other. And the idea that somehow they should be punished for not getting there fast enough in the morning. Only those first workers, they're having a hard time with God's form of discipline. They're struggling with it because they cannot seem to let go of their focus on getting their due. They want reward and penalty to be the way things work. And they just can't seem to open up their hearts to what God is inviting them into. So what's stopping them? Well, the landowner in the parable points to what our translation names as envy. You have envy, and I am offering generosity. But my commentaries say that the phrase that is translated as envy is really an idiom, a very colorful idiom that implies that their internal lamps have gone dark. Now, this comes out of their understanding of humans and emotion and psychology, and they saw part of what happens inside of us as being a light that either can be light up through our eyes, would shine forth, or would go dark. In other words, they said the eye was dark, the eye was evil, was that idiom. So it all basically is saying to us that the resentment these first comers felt is poisoning them from the inside out. Now, in the parable, the landowner toys with them because he's gently trying to teach them and nudge them into shifting their perspective. He's showing them and us that since reconciliation is God's aim, then God doesn't keep score the way we do, and we probably shouldn't be doing that either. The commentator that pointed this out to me puts it like this: we are called to see creation through the householder's eyes as a vineyard full of hard work, and at the same time full of God's graceful gifts. And even the hard work is a gift from God. And then once we see in this way, we're called to act accordingly, to become lamps that illumine the garden of God's generosity for all to see. So how do we do that? How do we as Christian disciples follow this gracious approach and carry on Christ's work of reconciliation, starting in ourselves? That's the hardest place, isn't it? Starting in ourselves, but then having that light not be dark but bright and shine forth out so that it changes us and the world inside and out. Seems simple in concept, but it is really hard sometimes. So much so that I'm sure we will still find our moments where our first reaction is, it's not fair, we need to punish them, just like the people in our neighborhood did in that story that I shared from the beginning of my sermon. And you know what? I wish I knew what happened to those kids, but I never found out. I mean, it's the kind of thing, it's all the rage, but then it kind of dies down before you get to hear the full story, right? I wasn't in the high school, I didn't get to hear the rest of the story. I don't know if the high school at the end chose to teach those kids about punishment or to teach them about reconciliation. But you know what I do know is that those kids have got to be in their 30s now, and they're probably raising, some of them, children of their own. And I'm pretty sure that they carry the resolution of that incident with them to this day, whichever way the school decided to go. So here's what I hope. I hope that it's not being carried with them in hearts that were hardened by the experience of retribution. Instead, I hope that what they carry with them is hearts that have been enlightened by the generous forgiveness and the hard work of reconciliation, of restoring those relationships. Because I want to believe that they are out there today, somewhere in this world, shining with that light of God's grace in all that they are, in all that they